sat down and began to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman who had been caught committing adultery, and they made her stand before them all. "Teacher," they said to Jesus, "this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. In our law, Moses commanded that such a woman must be stoned to death. Now what do you say?" They said this to trap Jesus, so that they could accuse him. But he bent over and wrote on the ground with his finger. As they stood there asking him questions, he straightened up and said, "Whichever one of you has committed no sin may throw the first stone at her." Then he bent over again and wrote on the ground. When they heard this, they all left, one by one, the older ones first. Jesus was left alone, and the woman was still standing there. He straightened up and said to her, "Where are they? Is there no one left to commend you?" "No one, sir," she answered. "Well then," Jesus said, "I do not commend you either. Go, but do not sin again."
So, this young woman in this story, we don't know the details of her life, but I can guess. I'm pretty sure when she was little, when people would meet her, they would say, "Oh, what a pretty little girl." And she heard that over and over and over. How many of you have had that said to you when you were small? "Oh, what a pretty little girl." I never did. Well, there was a stretch when I was a hippie where I might have heard that, but how many know, really? I want to know. Raise your hand if anybody ever said to you, "What a pretty little girl you are," something like that. Okay. Every girl hears that at some or another. I think that they're told that. And that seems like a pretty nice thing to say to people, but it is part of a process that is very problematic, because when we are constantly saying to little girls, "Oh, aren't you pretty? Oh, what a sweet little girl," we are telling them something about who they are supposed to be, aren't we? We are telling them that they are supposed to be pretty and sweet. And if you think they're not getting that message, just think about it yourself. How many times has it been made clear to you that little girls are to be pretty and sweet? And if you're not, that becomes a problem later on. Have you heard that message? Is it out there in our society? Things aren't that different. This was 2,000 years ago, and you know what? It's still happening today. So that little girl grew up, and they taught her things about what it meant to be pretty and sweet. And they talked to her, and they taught her that, but they didn't teach her much else. They didn't teach her to read back then. They didn't send her to school so that she could read the Holy Scriptures like they did with her brothers. They didn't teach her anything like that. They didn't teach her a trade. They just taught her how to cook and take care of clothing in the house, because why would she need to learn a trade? She's going to grow up and get married, and that's the only option she has. But what happens if that doesn't work? What happens to sweet little girls who grow up in the world and find out that the world is not very sweet back to them? And sometimes those girls get into situations where they have no other choices. They are not equal in society. They're not they're not educated. They are not taught that they are as important as the men are. And let me ask you, that message back in Jesus' time, girls are nice but men are important, does that message still get told? You bet it does. They've heard it and heard it and heard it. And whatever happened, this girl got into trouble somehow. She was, it says, convicted or accused of adultery, caught in the act of adultery. Now that could be any kind of thing, a sexual relationship outside of marriage. The most interesting thing about this story is how many people are involved in the act of adultery? Minimum. How many people were brought to Jesus? One. Where's the man? Not there. In fact, the only men that are there are all the men who are accusing, that crowd that you can barely make out there in the background. They're all men. And you know they were mansplaining things to this girl as they dragged her to Jesus. They brought her to Jesus for a reason, because they thought, we can discredit him at the same time as we can get rid of this terrible little girl here. We can get rid of both of them. We can kill two birds with one stone. Well, lots of stones, actually. They were going to stone her to death, throw stones at her until she was dead. And they brought her to Jesus to see if he would defend her, because if he did, then it would prove that he was not a very righteous person. And they brought this little girl, this young woman. I don't know how old she was. We're not told. They brought this girl who was never given much of a chance in life to Jesus and said, we should put her to death, right? And Jesus found a very clever way to turn that back on the men that were there, explaining to her why what she did was so wrong. He found a way to turn it back on them because the men that brought her to him were liars and cheaters and probably adulterers as well, some of them anyhow, and who knows what other sins they'd committed. And Jesus says, if you haven't committed a sin, you throw the first stone. So please stand up if you could have been a first stone thrower. Not a one of us. We all know where we are. And the men left. All those explainers decided to leave. They left one by one, and Jesus looked at her and said, where are your accusers? And she said, there's no one. And he said, I don't condemn you either. Now go. Don't sin anymore, but go in peace. Let's hear our second story.
Jesus left that place and went off to the territory near the cities of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman who lived in that region came to him. Son of David, she cried out, have mercy on me, sir. My daughter has a demon and is in terrible condition. But Jesus did not say a word to her. His disciples came to him and begged him, send her away. She is following us and making all this noise. Then Jesus replied, I have been sent only to the lost sheep of the people of Israel. At this, the woman came and fell at his feet. Help me, sir, she said. Jesus answered, it isn't right to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. That's true, sir, she answered, but even the dogs eat the leftovers that fall from their masters' tables. So Jesus answered her, you are a woman of great faith. What you want will be done for you. And at that very moment, her daughter was healed.
A foreign woman, did you hear that? She was a foreigner, which couldn't hardly be much more appropriate for our times, but she was not one of them. She was a foreigner, and she was there. And why was she there? What had happened that she came to this country? Had she, in most cases, when people leave one country for another, what are the reasons for that? Yeah, persecution, war, poverty, whatever. She was leaving something behind and came to this other country. And while she was here, she couldn't hide the fact that she was a foreigner. Everybody could look at her or hear her language speak, and they knew she wasn't one of them. But she had a problem. Her child was sick, and she had to do something about it. Some of us know what it's like to have a child who is very sick, and it's a terrifying and awful thing. She was sick, and she didn't know what to do. And she heard about this traveling holy man who people said had power to heal, and she went to him to see if that was going to be all right, if she could come to him and ask for his help. And so she did. She came to him and asked, but what happened? She got pushed aside. Why did she get pushed aside? 2 reasons. Who knows what they are? She was a foreigner and she was a woman. And so they didn't need her. She was, what was she supposed to be? Nah, not invisible, but that's a good point. What? Pretty and sweet. She is not supposed to be bugging the men about something she needs. She knows that. She knows they don't want to listen to her, but she doesn't have any choice because her child is sick. She doesn't know who this Jesus is really, but she doesn't have any choice. Why? Her child is sick. What do women do when their children are sick? They do whatever they can to do something about that. So she comes to Jesus and faces the mansplaining again. Everybody knows what mansplaining is, right? How many women in this room have been mansplained? All right. And now the tougher question, how many men have mansplained? I am not the only one. Carson? Yes, okay. Yes. Of mansplaining? Mansplaining is when a man tells a woman something that she either A, already knows, or B, doesn't need to know. All right. You see, because you're supposed to be pretty and sweet. The men are supposed to have the knowledge of stuff. And so you go into the store and the shop and you say, my car's making this funny noise, and you get mansplained. You ask for directions and you get mansplained. You go into work and you say, I've got this idea for this project, and you get mansplained. It happens all the time. And this poor woman with a sick child comes to Jesus and says, I don't know what to do. My child is sick. And she gets mansplained. She gets told why she should not bother Jesus. And the weird thing about it is, after the disciples tell her to just shut up and go away, after the disciples say that, then she goes to Jesus himself. The disciples go to Jesus, and the disciples say, would you tell her to get out of here? She's bugging us. They wanted her to stop. They told her to be quiet, but she persisted. She persisted, and she continued to ask. And they told her to go away because who needs a foreign woman around here? But still she persisted. And she asked Jesus. Finally, the disciples said to send her away, and Jesus' answer was, I don't have time to talk to her. I am sent to the lost sheep of Israel. She's a foreigner. That sounds like a bad thing. And then a little bit later, when she finally gets to Jesus and falls at his feet, he says to her, it is not right for me to take what is for the children, meaning the people of Israel, and give it to the dogs, meaning you foreigners. And doesn't that sound like an awful thing? Doesn't it? Why would Jesus say such a thing? Because he had a thing going on. He had a test going on. Because when he said that, the disciples looked up and goes, yeah, that's right. She's one of them. Let's get rid of her. But still, she persisted. And she said to Jesus, even the dogs get to eat the scraps that fall from the table. And then Jesus looks at her, and he looks at his disciples, and he looks at all those people who are getting ready to send her away again. He looks at all of them, and he says to the woman, you have great faith. What you want will be done for you. And the Bible tells us her daughter was healed from that moment. What Jesus wanted to do, it was a trap to suck those people into agreeing with him that this woman did not deserve to be cared for. But Jesus didn't see it that way. He didn't see a foreign woman. He just saw somebody in need. And he reached to her, forced her to stand up and speak her truth, forced the disciples to hear her truth and to stop all the mansplaining and listen to this woman. All right, one more story.
Jesus was in Bethany at the house of Simon, a man who had suffered from a dreaded skin disease. While Jesus was eating, a woman came in with an alabaster jar full of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on Jesus' head. Some of the people there became angry and said to one another, "What was the use of wasting the perfume? It could have been sold for more than 300 silver coins, and the money given to the poor." And they criticized her harshly. But Jesus said, "Leave her alone. Why are you bothering her? She has done a fine and beautiful thing for me. You will always have poor people with you, and at any time you want to, you can help them. But you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body to prepare it ahead of time for burial. Now, I assure you that whatever the gospel is preached all over the world, what she has done will be told in memory of her."
She figured it out before the men did, you know. She saw the end coming. She knew that the time when Jesus would be taken, because they couldn't put up with this idea of his, that God loved all people. They couldn't put up with that idea, and she knew it was coming. They were going to take him, they were going to throw him in jail, or they were going to kill him. And she saw this time coming, and she understood that Jesus was not going to be with her for much longer. But what could she do? How much political power did she have? Zero. None. There was no way she could stop these events from happening. Simply nothing she could do about it. So what could she do about it? The only thing she could do was to express what was in her heart, how she felt towards Jesus. The only thing she could do would be to give him this extravagant gift, this bottle of perfume. And can you imagine what that would be like if you took an expensive bottle of perfumed ointment and poured it over someone's head in a closed room? Can you imagine how that would go? And as soon as she did this, as soon as she poured this perfume over Jesus' head, what did the men do? I just told you what they do. What's that called? They're mansplaining again. They explained to her that what she did was wrong. She should have taken that bottle of perfume and sold it and given the money to the poor, right? Who could argue with this? Would you argue with this? Isn't that what she should have done? And so they began to, it says in that scripture, criticize her harshly. So they didn't just say, oh, you shouldn't have done that. They got personal with it. They pointed out, and I'm sure somebody said, just like a woman. And the truth is, it was just like a woman. Because women are just not willing to hold in their feelings of love and compassion for others the way that sometimes men are willing to do. And she just couldn't do it. She couldn't let that go. So she poured that perfume over Jesus' head, and they hit her with everything they had. Because when times get tough, when people are in trouble, women act with compassion and men argue about religion and politics. And that's what happened here. They got arguing over this religious point about what should have been done. Should they have given this money to the poor? What? And Jesus just says, leave her alone. Why are you bothering her? She has done who heard it? A beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. She poured that perfume over him, knowing that it could be tomorrow she would never see him again. She poured that perfume over his head because what good was it going to do him later on? And it wasn't that she didn't care about poor people. The chances are that she has given quite a bit to them all along. She just had an opportunity to do something beautiful for someone who was beautiful. And she did that and got scolded for it. And Jesus stopped it. And he said, don't bother her. She's done a beautiful thing. She has already anointed my body for burial before I am gone. And then he said this, and I tell you the truth, wherever the gospel is preached after this, what she has done will be remembered. And here we are, remembering it.
You've been listening to a sermon by Reverend Stephen Carnahan, pastor of High Street Congregational Church in Auburn, Maine. If you feel inspired by what you hear, you're invited to join us in person for worship services every Sunday morning, starting at 10 o'clock. Of course, you can always listen to Steve's sermons on the web. New sermons are posted every Monday by midday. Please explore this website for more information about our church, or visit our Facebook page at High Street Congregational Church, UCC, where you'll find the video version of Steve's sermons as well. We hope that God's presence will be known to you every hour of every day. May God's blessings rest upon you now and always. See you next week.